Well, one of the sectors in the Indian economy which has shown remarkable growth over the last several years and is really closely aligned, some would suggest, with India's economic progress going forward is the aviation sector. Now, there are plenty of challenges there, but there is plenty of hope and plenty of promise. We've got the Civil Aviation Minister with us, Jyotiraditya Scindia. We are both extremely passionate about aviation. Great to have you. Let me ask you a direct question and ask you for some years or dates in mind. We want India to become an international aviation hub like Singapore, like Dubai, like Doha. Given the pace and the growth, how many more years would that likely take in your estimate?
So first of all, Vishnu, thank you very much for having me. It's always a pleasure to be on the show with you. Aviation has really started on its growth curve now in India. I think a market that was very saturated on the domestic front. The growth of both, on the one hand, airports, from 74 airports in 2014 to 149. I just inaugurated a new airport 3 days ago in Utkela in Orissa. So we are at 149 airports now, not 148. In terms of fleet size, from 400 to 700. And in terms of the number of travelers, from 6 crores to almost 14.5 crores. What are the projections going forward? The projections going forward are, as far as airports are concerned, touching 200 to 220 by 2030. As far as planes are concerned, going from our current fleet size of 700 to almost about 1,500 by 2030. And similarly, as far as passengers are concerned, going from current 14.5 crores to, some studies have projected, almost 42.5 crores by 2030. Now that's the phenomenal growth that you see. When that happens, and specifically that must happen on the international side, because until now our carriers have been very concentrated on growing capacity on the domestic side, and therefore narrow-bodied aircraft. You've now seen carriers like Air India, Indigo place orders for 470 aircraft on one hand and 500 aircraft on the other. Both orders comprising of a decent amount of, on the one hand, large body with Boeing and Airbus with Air India, and as far as Indigo is concerned, with A321 XLRs, which can do a distance of almost 6-7 hours. Now once that happens, then the concept of an international hub also becomes I wouldn't want to say a low-hanging fruit, but an opportunity for India. India for too long has had its hub either on its eastern border or western border. We are currently working with DIAL to look at setting up a hub in Delhi to start with. But what I feel is in the next decade or so, the capability of India to have not necessarily only a single hub, but multiple hubs. One in Delhi, one in South India, one on western side. That capability certainly is there. But I think we need to start with one, engage and make sure that the proof of concept takes off. And once that does happen, then replicate that going forward. Too many of our travelers today go via a third country.
It's a one-stop.
And I think it's important to, instead of sixth freedom, really looking at direct flights and therefore creating that hub structure within India.
So to answer my question, 5 years before we get at least one truly global hub, given the pace of expansion, or 10 years?
Well, I think you could look at a roadmap of 5 years. I would want it to be sooner, but I'm not going to divulge a date closer than 5 years. I believe that I think it's important to undercommit and overdeliver as opposed to overcommitting and underdelivering.
All right. So 5 years, that's an interesting statistic nonetheless. At one level, there is pressure, and I use that word loosely, on you because we've got the companies coming up with massive orders. They're banking on the Indian economy. They're banking on your ministry. Can your ministry match the infrastructure requirements required for 1,000+ aircraft within, let's say, the next decade easily? And by that, it's parking bays, it's space for engineering, ground support, physical space in airports. What are you doing to match the demand which exists?
So I think it's a very important question, and I think always the toss-up is, do you put the cart before the horse or the horse before the cart? And I think it's important to create capacity, and which is why you've seen the scorching pace at which Prime Minister's government in the last 9 years has gone from 74 airports to 149 airports, waterdromes and heliports.
Yeah.
And when I give you a target of 200, 220 plus by 2030, you're looking at a capacity addition of almost 50% more from the current level, right? So that's the kind of pace that we're looking at. Now, when you talk about throughput capability, and I think there your question is centered really on the metros.
Yes.
If you look at Delhi Airport today, we have a throughput capability of 70 million.
Yes.
That capability is going to go to 109 million come this December. What does that mean? That means that Delhi is going to become one of the largest airports in the world. Not in the subcontinent, not in Asia, but in the world. We're going to be, if at all, second only to in Atlanta. Right? So that's the kind of scale you're looking at. In the next 12 months, you will have the inauguration of Jewar Airport at almost 12 million, which will grow in its capacity by 2030 to almost 60 million there. So between these two airports, you're going to have close to about 160 million throughput capability. Bombay is capped out already at about 50, 60 million. Navi Mumbai is coming up, which will grow to another 50, 60 million. Chennai, we're growing capacity from 25 million to almost about 45 million. Similar is the case in Hyderabad. Calcutta at 35 million going to 55 million. Right. So therefore, current 6 metro capacity in India, which is in the range of about 220 million throughput capability, is going to go to almost 430 million in the next 4 to 5 years. So in terms of being able to cater to growing passengers, I think that's something that we have already planned for. Having said that, the private sector and the public sector has a very aggressive infrastructure capex plan in place, close to about 98,000 crores over the next 3 to 5 years, of which Airports Authority of India has a capex plan of roughly 25,000 crores, and the balance 63,000 crores is the private sector. AI is going to look at expansion of almost 42 brownfield airports and 3 greenfield airports, out of which 1 has already been built up in terms of Holongi. Similarly, the private sector in their 63,000 crore capex is looking at 7 brownfield airports and 2 greenfield airports, out of which Mopa Goa, 3 greenfield airports, out of which Mopa Goa has already been built out, and Jewar and Navi Mumbai is being built out. So there's a huge thrust in civil aviation, and I believe, and I'm putting my neck out there on the line, but I believe in the next decade or so, civil aviation is going to become bulwark of transportation in India for a large number of people, even larger than just the first AC and second AC of railways, because our competition is a AC product by the very nature of the fact that an aircraft is air conditioned.
Delhi Airport, you said, will become the second largest in the world in a finite period of time.
If not the largest.
By when?
By this December.
By this December.
109 million
You will
capability.
be the second largest airport.
Correct.
In the world,
Correct.
and you are set to exceed Atlanta in a period going forward.
Sure,
Whenever
but I'm just saying you'll be at 109 million capacity by December, Jan.
We'll talk about airfares in just a bit, because that's an important point that you raised. But there are smaller airlines in India which are struggling to survive. There's a legal battle SpiceJet is going through. Go First is, in financial distress, barely exists right now, technically exists. Is this shake-up in the industry, which a lot of people said would likely take place, isn't that a bad thing for the customer? Because if you have a duopoly type situation, 2 very large airlines, then fares would likely go up.
Well, if you look at the economic basis of your statement, it's unfounded. By its very nature, the aviation business is a very inelastic business in terms of pricing. The minute you start raising prices, your demand drops off a cliff. So it's not an elastic market.
Right.
That being said, as Civil Aviation Minister, I would like to have a minimum of 4 to 5 players in the space.
Akasa is a strong third, in fact, so I should
So,
actually mention
so
that.
I was just going to come to that. So while we do talk about the airlines which are undergoing some issues at this point of time, and that is pertaining to their way of doing business and not the industry in itself. So there's very little that one can do to intervene, whether they are contractual issues or whether they're the legal issues. For the first time in over 2 decades, you've seen a new airline being born in India in the form of Akasa. And you've seen that fledgling, nestling airline go from 2 aircraft to 20 aircraft in a period of 12 months.
Yeah.
Now that's a record,
Yeah.
right? Across the world, that's a record. So my hat's off to them in terms of how they've grown their capacity. They also have a very ambitious target of going to almost 70 airplanes in the next 3 to 4 years. Having said that, Vishnu, also I think it's important for you to concentrate on the smaller aircraft, the regional airlines. Udaan, the Ude Desh Ka Aam Nagrik scheme, has not only connected people, has not only connected cities, but it has, in its wake, given birth to 3 to 4 new airlines in this country. Fly 91 was born because of Udaan. Fly Big has been born because of Udaan. India One Air has been born because of Udaan. Star Air has been born because of Udaan. And so therefore you are going to see you're seeing a huge spurt in regional connectivity to not tier 1 to tier 2, but really tier 2 to tier 3 and tier 3 to even tier 4 cities with 9-seater aircraft and 3-seater aircraft. And that's the revolution that is going to be unfolding itself in India over the next couple of years as well.
But let me ask you, there's a CAG report
So there
which
will
has
be
come out.
there will be a hub and spoke
Sure.
arrangement where a lot of these smaller regional airlines and smaller aircraft will feed onto the tier 2 cities, which will then be taken on by the narrow bodied aircraft to tier 1 and other cities.
And so that's the chain. But, you know, be direct as you always are with us. Are you somewhat disappointed at the pace at which Udaan has developed as a scheme? Because if you look at the CAG report, 52% of awarded regional routes could not commence operations. Only 30% of regional routes which commenced ops have completed 3 years during the initial period. We wanted a lot more,
I think, Vishnu, in life, you can always say a glass is half full or a glass is half empty, right? The fact that the scheme was born in 2016.
Yes.
It's only been 7 years. And the fact that you have 495 routes that have connected people that were never ever connected
Yes.
by civil
Yes.
aviation
Yes.
in this country ever before. The fact that cities that were on the civil aviation map in World War II and were obliterated from that map soon after World War II are now being reconnected by civil aviation. Case in point for you is a city on the western coast on the eastern coast of Orissa, Jharsuguda, Roopsi in Assam, Kishangarh in Rajasthan, Darbhanga in Bihar, all completely unconnected. Third point, the fact that 4 regional airlines have been born because of Udaan. There was no way they would have even come into existence if Udaan had not been in place, if a viability gap funding principle had not been in place. Fourth point, the fact that through Udaan you have built out 74 airports. 74 airports in this country on a regional basis have been built out because of the funding from Udaan, 4,500 crores. Utkela was the last one which I inaugurated, right?
But
So when you roll out a scheme, the scheme has to have, people like yourselves have always argued that there must be a sunset clause.
Yes.
So every scheme has to have a sunset clause,
Sure.
right? And so Udaan has a sunset clause of 3 years.
Yes.
That I will give you this viability gap funding for 3 years. So you will be able to fly that route based on my VGF for 3 years.
Yeah.
Post that, either it becomes viable and carries on, or if it doesn't, then we've got to look at other routes.
Right.
Right? And the fact that you've got at least close to about 25 to 30% of those routes today becoming sustainable in terms of eventual routes, right? That itself is a huge feather in the cap for civil aviation. And all the 4 points that I mentioned to you, which would have never happened, the very fact today that through Udaan you have carried 1 crore 31 lakh passengers in this country in the last 7 years who would have never flown in an aircraft.
No, I agree. I
Right?
agree. And these numbers...
And you've had 234,000, 2,34,000 flights through Udaan, which would have never happened.
No, but I understand this, and these numbers are absolutely correct. I'm just trying to understand why have many of those routes not
There
worked?
have been many reasons.
Is it the airlines?
So
Is
there have
it
been
their
many reasons.
capacity?
Many times the airline has bid and then has decided not to fly that route. Many times the airline has started a route and then it's had some, because it had only one aircraft and the aircraft had an engineering problem and it got grounded, and therefore it's not been able to finish that route. So what we've done this time around, the two changes that I've brought about in Udaan. Number one, I have moved from ATR aircraft, which was the smallest aircraft at that point of time, 72-seater, to small aircraft and helicopters. So
Yes.
I've created specific Udaan routes, Udaan rounds, 5.1 and 5.2, and before that I think it was 4.1 for helicopters and small planes to connect your 9-seaters, your helicopters. We've got almost about 25 routes in Uttarakhand that are operational today on helicopters, about 9 routes in Himachal, about close to 16 to 18 routes in the northeast on helicopter. Small aircraft, we've got the round going on as we speak, which is 5.2. That's the one tweak that we've done. The second tweak that we are contemplating and thinking of doing is we're going to put in place a structure such that if you come in and bid for a route and then you do not ply that route, maybe in 2 months or 3 months, there is some kind of a penalty on you as well, right? And that will wean out the not so serious players and make sure only the serious players actually come in and bid for those routes. So we are doing that as we go along as well.
There was criticism, and I think a part of it was somewhat unfounded, on airfares going up massively.
The other thing that we are also thinking of doing is right now Udaan is limited to 500 kilometers or 600 kilometers in terms of distance. So therefore what you do by doing that is you actually limit your radial, limit your radius.
So you've increased that.
So what we are thinking of doing is saying you can fly as far as you want, and this is still on the drawing board. But the VGF, the viability gap funding, will only be for that 500 off, let's say, for example, a 1,000-kilometer route. Only the 500.
So you're tweaking Mission Udaan.
So we're trying to tweak it to make it
more attractive.
Not to make it more attractive, to give a variability, to make it more viable, and to draw in more players.
Okay. There was this period a couple of months back where last-minute fares went up massively in only a handful of sectors. And the argument which was raised that, look, these prices are huge. But they did settle within days, in fact, almost in all cases. So to what extent does the government need to be involved in regulating fares, or should it?
So first of all, civil aviation is a deregulated sector. So the government cannot regulate a deregulated sector. Having said that, what happened in June was if you will, a spike or an anomaly. Two things coincided at the same time.
Go first was one, right?
No. The first is that the civil aviation sector is a cyclical sector within a year. So you have high season and low season. So and therefore you have high prices and low prices. From the Sera, which is October until Jan, is high season, where you have a lot of people traveling. Demand goes up, prices go up. And this is an international phenomena. Thanksgiving, New Year's, Christmas, all of that internationally. Then you have low season from Feb till about April, May. Then the summer holidays come. And so you have high season again until monsoon. And then from July till September again is low season. So it's a cyclical in terms of prices and demand, one affecting the other. Now what happened is you normally have this cycle. But in between of a high season you also had an airline with almost 30 aircraft being grounded.
Right.
So capacity got sucked out of the system.
Sure.
So you had high demand,
Yeah.
and then you had almost close to a 5 to 7% drawdown on capacity.
Sure.
So you had a double whammy
Right.
happen at the same time.
Right.
And therefore you had certain cities which were primarily connected by GO.
Srinagar, for example.
Leh,
is huge.
Srinagar, Pune,
Yeah.
Ahmedabad, Goa, which had an abnormal rise in fares. And so we had a meeting on the 5th of June, and I called in the airlines, and I said that this is not tenable and this is not right. And we had a very free and frank discussion, and soon after that we actually saw, and I started monitoring the prices on a daily basis, and you saw the normalization of fares happen.
All right, one final question. Heliports. Helicopter aviation in this country is still fledgling. You've spoken briefly about that. What more do you think needs to be done to encourage helicopter aviation in India?
So what we've done is taken a number of steps. So first of all, I brought about a new helicopter policy where I dismantled a lot of the regulatory conditions, making it easier for people to fly helicopters. In terms of permissions, and we put up a heli portal for permissions, direct permissions. We circulated a Heli Disha booklet to all 600 collectors across the country to make them understand the parameters that a helipad must have, what is the radial distances from obstructions that should be in place. And along with that, we started bringing out this new Udaan round just for helicopters. And we've actually seen a proliferation of that happen. I firmly believe that now, as people are getting used to, and we also have a VGF system, so therefore earlier you had helicopter travel available to you, but it was away from your budget and my budget. Now with this VGF, you actually brought the prices down to almost 3,500 or 4,000 rupees for a particular sector, Badrinath, Kedarnath, and so on and so forth, or the Northeast, for example. And therefore now people are availing of these facilities. And I think there will be a growth in both helicopter fleet as well as flying in the days to come, as soon as this Udaan round is.
I didn't ask you about flight safety. I know it's a huge issue for you, perhaps top of your mind. There is this issue of boorish passengers, and it's not unique to India. It happens all over the world. That said, we have to set a very firm signal. Do you believe that the system in putting people on a no-fly list is strong enough? Are you constantly revising that? What have been some of your conversations with airlines in this regard?
So as far as unruly passengers are concerned, that's a wild card, if you will, if I may use that term. Because no one knows how you or I are going to behave when we board a flight. But having said that, I think it's important to, as you said, to set examples and to set precedents. And we have been extremely strong on coming down on any unruly passenger on any of our airlines, whether it is through following the legal process, whether it is putting that person on a no-fly list for an extended period of time, and so on and so forth. Whatever processes we have at our command, we use those completely to make sure that when you fly, you're not only responsible for yourself, you're responsible for everyone else on that flight. And then you need to board that plane with that sense of responsibility.
Sure. Wonderful speaking to you, Minister. Jyotiraditya Scindia telling us a lot about the future of this particular sector. It is tremendous. There are no two ways about it. It's really a question of when India becomes even larger than we are in terms of becoming a truly global hub. But the potential is incredible. The demand is also incredible. There's so much to discuss in this.